Hello, BookTube. All right, we're back for part 3 of our August Q&A on this 12-nay channel. We are never going to have a 12K Q&A, but we will do a monthly Q&A. That's fine by me. But this channel's already way too big, so the fact that there are no more subscribers, the fact that there goes one right now. I've had enough of this channel. I'm burning rubber. We don't want 12K. There are already too many of you to mail books to. So where did we drop off here? Oh, okay. We're at PHXSNS1. There's 2 questions. Number 1, aside from history and biography, what's the first section you peruse in a used bookstore? Well, I don't go to history and biography in a used bookstore first because they tend to be bad. Right? Those sections in used bookstores tend to be bad. A normal used bookstore, we're talking about an Annie's Book Swap or something like that. Any nonfiction is usually going to be bad. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Book Rack, a very good, big, bustling, local used bookstore just outside of Boston. The nonfiction and biography section is notoriously bad. It usually is in used bookstores. So it tends not to be the first place that I go. I usually go to the place that will have a big stock, science fiction, mystery, romance, that sort of thing. I usually go there. And number 2, aside from those you knew personally, who are some celebrities whose death deeply affected you? Oh, there have been quite a few. People whose talents have given me a lot of pleasure, whether it's an author or an actor, whatever. I know the 2 that are coming up that will hurt a lot will be Jane Goodall and Joni Mitchell. Those will hurt a lot, and I don't think they can be long postponed. In either case, I think 2022 will be the very latest. 2021 we'll probably see off both of them. Emily Jones says, I have another question. Did you ask it one already? I'm copying these haphazardly from the comment section, so I might have. Do you own a TV or watch much television or films? I can't imagine you have time with so much reading, and I hope myself to trade my little TV time for more books. Well, I've said this before on this channel, and I'm not snooty about it. I'm not condescending about it. I don't own a TV. No. I don't know why you would. I've got devices. I've got a phone. I've got 2 tablets. I've got a laptop. I don't know why I would need a plasma screen TV that's as big as a boat sail on the wall. I don't myself need that at all. But I do have the means to watch these things. And not only that, but I have the desire to watch these things. So I subscribe to Netflix, I subscribe to Amazon Prime, and I never watch them. Even though they have lots of enticing content, I never watch them. I never watch anything on either one of them. I have a friend who works in Hollywood who sends me a regular stream of electronic screener copies of forthcoming stuff. And I get them, and we email about other things, but when she asks, have you watched this yet, I usually haven't. And she's very nice about it. She's been nice all along. She has said for decades that the literary world is lucky because she has always maintained that I'm just as good a critic of movies and TV shows as I am of books. Or actually, no, just as good. But the main point that she stressed over the decades is that I'm just the same kind of reviewer of books and movies of movies and TV as I am of books, which is no artsy-fartsy stuff, no artistic theory, no Michel Foucault, no nothing like that. I'm talking about the thing you're actually watching, what makes sense and what doesn't, what's really good and what's not theory and not film school, nothing like that. She's read some of my film criticism and says, you're the only one I've ever read who does that. But I don't do it, no. I want to all the time, virtually every day. When I settle on the couch with the bean for the day's writing and reading, I think, okay, all well and good, but tonight you're going to set aside 2 hours to watch something instead of reading. You're going to set aside 2 hours to watch something, and I don't. I end up just not doing it. I get to the beginning of that alleged set aside 2 hour time, and I just read instead. I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it. Byron Perry says, what is your opinion of Terry Pratchett, of Terry Pratchett's books? In the UK, he is very popular and beloved, but from what I can tell, he seems much less popular in the US, far less popular in the US than the UK. He's still beloved here by science fiction fans. Do you think authors have any responsibility to readers? How would you rank the Star Trek series, not counting ongoing ones? Okay, so those are 3 different questions. I have never been a fan of Terry Pratchett. I know that's heresy. He is well beloved. His books strike me as one-joke wonders. They're harmless, but that's all that you can say about them. And if that's all you can say about them, that's pretty damning. If you're going to write a book called Guards, or Thud, if you're going to write a book where you're signaling, even with the title, that the whole thing is just a trifle, I've never liked really anything that I've read by him. It seemed to be watered down Douglas Adams that isn't very funny. So and it seemed to me to need to be in order to justify how it's revered. Terry Pratchett and I are just ships that passed in the night. I don't get the reverence for him at all. The second question is, do you think authors have any responsibility to their readers? I would say no, unless the author is writing history or biography, in which case a responsibility to your readers would be either to be very good and meticulous about your research, or to announce ahead of time that you weren't, and that you're going for something different. But if you're writing fiction, which is, as this is BookTube, I'm assuming you're talking about fiction, a novelist has no... someone who's writing so-called contemporary literary fiction has no obligation to their readers. No. If they're writing books in a series, like for mystery or science fiction, you probably want to get your own continuity straight. You probably owe that to your readers. But other than that, no. And how would you rank the Star Trek series, not counting ongoing ones? Number 1 would be Star Trek, the original series. Number 2 would be Voyager. Number 3 would be Deep Space Nine. Number 4 would be Enterprise. Number 5 would be Star Trek, the original series, or Star Trek, the Next Generation. Let's see here. That's XEERO 00. Hello, would you consider giving up book reviewing for something else? Have you ever seriously considered writing novels / nonfiction books for a living instead of reviewing everyone else's stuff? Interesting question. I love reviewing. I feel, I was about to say I just recently returned to it. I didn't. It's actually been a while since I made a return to book reviewing after a long absence from it. I did it for a long time, then I left it for a long time, and then I came back. And a few old reviewing friends of mine who were long since out of the business said, all right, well, we thought you were dumb to leave, but you can't come back. Nobody ever comes back. And I did. But I love it. I would never want to stop now. And I don't know that I have a lot of talent for writing fiction, but writing nonfiction, that I could do. It's just, it's such an uphill thing. In the 21st century, it's a murderous uphill battle just to get an agent, let alone to get a contract. I don't know how I would do it. If I took time out, like for instance, years ago on this channel, I was telling you about it, I was planning on writing a big 800-page David McCullough's Truman-style biography of William Howard Taft, President Taft, Chief Justice Taft. I was planning on doing that. I was deep into the research. Hasn't been done in the modern era. A big one volume that's as thoroughly researched as it is readable has never been done. And I'm in the perfect position to do it, and I want to do it. And I thought about that. I thought, okay, what is the whole process there? You'd have to take a huge amount of time out from everything else to write that book. You wouldn't have to put your life on hold. It still can be possible. It still can be done. I never have anything but a sardonic smile for booktubers, large and small, who point around at their stupid fake set on their stupid video that they do once a month and say, none of this would be possible if it weren't for my gigantic crowd of patrons on Patreon. Yes, it would be. You have a phone. You can film things. It's all possible. You don't need the money to do that. You're just a lying sack of crap. That's all. And so I would never say the thing like I couldn't do it without being subsidized. I could, of course. A lot of great books in this room were written by people who weren't fully subsidized so they could sit around in their arse all day long. But I thought, okay, so you devote that time to it. It's a huge project. It becomes all-consuming. I might have to travel. If I'm going to do original research, I might have to travel. And then the huge uphill battle of getting an agent and a million different revisions and maybe a publicity tour and the agent taking a cut of the funds and the publisher taking a cut of the funds. And it daunted me. I don't know if that makes me a wimp, but it daunted me. It isn't the same thing at all as writing up a punchy book review, sending it to an editor and having the editor say, this is exactly what I need. I'll take it. Here's your check. And if I have a need like this again, maybe we do this again. That seems to me to be 100 times easier than writing a book, unless I were to self-publish the book. And that's entirely possible. Self-publishing has changed in the last 10 years. There's no longer a stigma attached to it. It's a normal thing that people do. It can be done extremely professionally. If you want to sink in the money, it can be done extremely professionally. And you have an ISBN. You don't have distribution in bookstores, but you're easily available to most people who buy books. So I could do that. But and I do still think about it a little, but I haven't committed, that's for sure. Let's see here. Philip Jonkin says, what are your thoughts on the current space race between Musk, Bezos, and Branson? Well, as I mentioned in an earlier answer in these Q&As, I think it's obscene. It's just obscene. The sheer amount of money being spent here when nurses aides, when librarians, when bookshop workers, when emergency responders, when school teachers, public school teachers who are paying for their schoolroom supplies out of their own pocket. That money could have done so much good. It did nothing. It did nothing at all the way it was. Even the sop that I used to say about the American space program, where that is a large amount of money, it could be spent on things like primary school teachers, but it's giving us a heroic ideal to aspire to. It's giving us all something to look up to. Even that is removed when it's just monomaniacal business a-holes who are doing it. Then you're not looking up to anything there. It's just personal aggrandizement. You're not saying this is something we're doing. You're saying something they're doing, and they're doing it explicitly to leave the planet. It's just, so even the motivation is a-hole. I think it's totally obscene. I think these people are obscene. They are affronts to moral decency. They could, any one of these three people that you name could take 1/2 of 1/4's profits and make the lives of thousands and thousands of people better. Even if you want to say, all right, well, I'm not in the business of giving handouts. These people could make themselves billionaires. Total lie. But even if you're going to say that, are you going to exclude children? Children are innocent, right? Children aren't in competition with you yet. They aren't in boardrooms yet. You could be making the lives of thousands and thousands of children better. And that's to say nothing of animals, of non-human animals, shelters, dogs and cats all around them. It's just obscene. It's just obscene. That's all. John Vuto says, you've said a few times that Bob Dylan is illiterate and that he didn't write any of his songs. I've searched the web but can't find anything that supports this. Can you elaborate on this? P.S. I love the channel. Well, thank you for the comment of the channel. When it comes to Bob Dylan and the sheer scope of the fraud that he is, wait 30 years. Come back to me in 30 years. See what history says about him in 30 years. Isaiah Armstrong says, I have a few questions for you. I recently just read Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway and struggled with it, yet saw so much to love in her writing that I think she might become a favorite author. I'll take that as a first reaction, absolutely. Are all her books that difficult? If so, any tips with how I should approach her other novels? Would it be wise if I read a biography of her beforehand? And if so, what would you recommend? Well, you could read a biography of her or some version of her writer's diary or any of her letters, but it's absolutely not necessary. No, the books are difficult because you're following one of the smartest people who's ever written a book through the labyrinth of her own creative process. But they are difficult in that sense. And you've already sensed that. You already read that book and you followed her enough to enjoy it, but it was hard. Okay, that's very different from willful obscurity, where the book is kind of an acid trip and you either have a good trip or you have a bad trip, but you never understand it. Willful obscurity is there are some dude bro gods, some sacred objects of dude bro lit that are willfully obscure. You're not supposed to be able to follow along. You're not supposed to get it. You're just supposed to marvel and get high off how hard it is. Virginia Woolf isn't like that at all. So I wouldn't suggest that you need to read a biography or anything about these books. I would suggest keep at it. You know, you just read Mrs. Dalloway, read something maybe a little less difficult. The Voyage Out, for instance. Read something like that, then go back to Mrs. Dalloway and dig into it a little more. Spend your whole life doing it. There's certainly worse ways to spend a reading life. You had another question too, though, didn't you? Yes, I have a sweet spot for long novels and / series, and have been eyeing Anthony Pohl's Dance to the Music of Time. I've heard mixed reactions to it. I remember you mentioning that you love it. Okay, if you remember me mentioning that I love it, and I do, then you haven't heard mixed reactions. You've heard the right reaction and a whole bunch of wicked pissaloozas. Okay? That's not a mixed reaction. You've already heard that it is Steve approved. What more do you need? Anyway, let's let you limp along. What do you love about it? Well, what I love about it won't be what you love about it, necessarily. How should I prepare for such a long work if I need to at all? You don't need to. You don't need to at all. I had this discussion with a book reviewing friend of mine 20 years ago. I never happened it again. You don't need to. It's a gigantic work. It's a whole world. It's a garden. So you have to let it sort of take you in. And you have to learn the people and the time frames, and the author has some tics, some narrative tics. You have to learn that too. But I would assume that you will think right away that even while you're learning that, there's plenty to keep you entertained. There is plenty to keep you hooked. I don't think you need any preparation at all. Give it a read. If you're so inclined, give it a read. How are we doing for time? We're fine. Alan Kean says, I have 2 questions. Number 1, any tips for getting a first dog, in parentheses, a beagle, and doing so within an apartment? And number 2, favorite Russian literature author? Okay, number 2 is easy. It's Tolstoy. And number 1, most dog people or people who want to become a dog person don't like this answer. But I have to do right by my own people. And the plain and simple truth is, not all dog breeds are the same. And some dog breeds are not beginner dog breeds. Some dog breeds dictate whether or not you can have them, and others don't. Beagles are extremely popular dogs, but they are not a beginner breed. They're as smart as you are. They're far more stubborn than you are. They're far more inventive than you are. They can be very vocal. They're extremely demanding. So I know this firsthand, unlike a lot of my other dog breed experience where I just know it through training or through dealing with people. I've had a huge number of Beagles in my life. They were my whole life. Until what seems to me to be comparatively recently, any old friend of mine who's gotten back in touch with me through the miracle of social media has always said, what bookstore you're working at and how many Beagles do you have? So it was once upon a time an absolutely standard thing. It was written. That has changed, obviously. I've since then had a pointer and a basset hound and now a little schnauzer. But with Beagles, I know whereof I speak. I don't know why you're saying that your first dog is going to be a Beagle, but you should reconsider, especially if you have an apartment. Though the fact that it's your first dog and the fact that it's an apartment, and by extension I assume that means you'll be leaving the dog alone in the apartment a lot of the time, mitigates against it being a Beagle. It's just a simple matter of breed characteristics. Right? If you have a small apartment, you're going to be gone all day, it's your first dog, you wouldn't get a Doberman Pinscher either. I would suggest that you do some research. Feel free to email me. I will help you every step of the way. But figure out what kind of dog is best for the situation you're going to be bringing it into before you bring it into it. Because Beagles are one of the most popular purebred breeds in the United States. But they're also often one of the most popular breeds to show up dumped at an animal shelter. Don't be part of that cycle. If it's your first dog and it's a small apartment and by extension you're going to be gone a lot of the time, don't get a Beagle. Talk to me about it instead. There are plenty of other things you could do. My strongest suggestion would be, if you want your first dog, go to your local animal shelter and adopt the oldest dog there. Even if the dog has medical conditions, take those medical conditions on and give that dog 4 wonderful years. Do that instead of setting your heart on a very high maintenance breed that isn't right for your setting. But one way or another, I mean, there have been people who've said, well, you never did that. You had Beagles. Okay, that's not quite the same. I have an aptitude with dogs that is, in my experience, never been shared by anyone else I've ever encountered. It's not quite the same. And I have a high-spirited little dog now, but terriers were made for human companionship. They were made to be indoor dogs. Feel free to email me, but the plan as you sketch it out here, a first dog in a small apartment, it is not a good idea for that to be a Beagle. It has a much more likelihood of failing to the detriment of everyone involved, especially the dog, than succeeding. So feel free to get in touch with me. Let's see here. Me Too says, hello, Steve. What is your take on modern... French, I missed out saying. On the modern setting in today, on modern adaptations is what the question is, in today's theater and opera. Do you think these modern reiterations of well-known classics are detractors or contributors to the art? And that'd be the sort of thing where Hamlet comes on stage driving a motorcycle or wearing, you know, Crips and Bloods or that sort of thing, where someone has futzed around with the trappings and the setting of the production. Went to see Traviata, that's La Traviata to you, okay, the other night, and Violetta was actually a stripper and Alfredo was a high-class pimp, that sort of thing. Yes. Yes, I've seen that kinds of thing many, many times. My rule of thumb is typically, if the change is thought-provoking, that's fine. If it's whimsical, that's fine. But if it would affect the plot, as in the case of what you're talking about here, that would affect the plot. If it would affect the plot, then it doesn't work. Right? If it affects the plot, then it doesn't work. If it won't work with the adaptation that you have in mind, then you can't do it. You can do it, and you'll probably be lauded for your courage, but it'll be dumb. It will distract the audience that cares about the play. Let's see here. Leo Percara says, hello, Steve. Can you recommend us a book about the history of the failing of the American public education system, mostly for lower social classes? A large number of books on that subject. I'm not sure I could pick one out of the crowd. There are a huge number of books on that particular subject. I just got one this year, The Education Trap, about exactly this subject in Boston. Also, doesn't reading so much about contemporary problems of your country affect you sometimes? Well, it does, sure. I read the books and I get outraged or saddened or miserable, but I have a built-in coping mechanism. I have a coping mechanism that never fails. I can shift into a world in which there's no English, in which there are no books, in which there's pure, unhampered companionship. I can shift into that world. I can stay in that world for a whole day if I want. And it's like a bath for the mind. I come out of it totally refreshed. I don't need... What you doing? What are you doing? Is that itching you? I don't need much time in that world to come out totally refreshed. And also, I love what I do. You know? I love what I do. Even those books that irritate. I love the endless supply of books. I love the world of just swimming and basking and bathing and slapping all around in the world of books. I love it. The book might irritate, but not for long. Never for long. Carolyn Nixon says, would you please talk about the acknowledgements section in novels? When and why did they start being included? Is there ever anything of interest to those outside the industry? Thanks in advance for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, it's become a bugaboo. Acknowledgement sections have become, they were, once they started expanding, in the 20th century they started expanding and expanding and expanding, and one of the reasons for that is because it became harder and harder to get a book to readers without a huge crowd of people involved. At the beginning of the 20th century, you didn't have to fight tooth and nail just to get an agent to represent you. You had to fight tooth and nail maybe to get a publisher to pay any attention to you, but that was it. And there were no such things as sensitivity readers. There were no such things as MFAs, except in a handful of places. So you didn't reach market. You didn't get your book to market indebted to so many people. That's what the acknowledgement section is for. It's to sort of verbally pay off those debts, and in the 21st century also to virtue signal. But the reason why they've metastasized into such the size that they are now, I've seen acknowledgement sections go on for 4 pages for a novel, debut novel. That's bad. And the reason they've grown to that size is because it's become harder and harder to just write a good book, get a publisher's reader interested in it, get them to send it to market. That never happens anymore. Instead, it's a huge team of people who are involved, marketing people, a manager, a beta reading group, a writing group, an agent, an agent's assistant, an agent at the publisher, or an editor at the publisher, a group editor at the publisher, a main editor at the publisher, publicists, the marketing people, the design people. So it's become a huge thing where you have to thank everybody. There's also a bit of 21st century authorly vanity involved. The 21st century is the vanity century. And that's why a lot of authors take their acknowledgement section as sort of their turn at the Oscar podium, where you ostentatiously thank a whole bunch of people because it makes you look more important. I think they should be stricken. Dedicate your book, but no acknowledgements at all. Don't acknowledge anybody. Unless maybe works of nonfiction, history, and biography, where you have to acknowledge you want to acknowledge the library staff that's helped you so much. But acknowledgements in a work of fiction, get rid of them. Just as a publisher, tell the author, you get to dedicate the book to someone. You don't get anything else. What do I know? Let's see here. M3 Industries, how are we doing for time? We'll do one more. I enjoy your reviews of periodicals so much. Would love for you to, oh right, I think I answered you. Would love for you to create a periodical canon for news, opinions, current events, sciences, and more. What are the must-haves for a curious intellectual? It's a great idea. I think I emailed you about this, or maybe I answered this comment. It's a great idea. I will certainly do that. A must-have list for periodicals. That would be a lot of fun, because I read a lot of them, and I'm expanding that list. I dropped it for a long time. I cut back on a lot in the last few years, and I'm expanding it now. So I have a whole lot of old favorites that I'm welcoming back. David Wiley, can we still keep going? David Wiley says, if your bookish collection disappeared one day, what would be the first 10 books you would seek out to replace into your physical library, and why those 10 as the top priority? Okay, I want you to prepare yourself, not just David Wiley, but everybody else who's listening to this. I want you to prepare yourself, okay? All right. Prepare yourself for a shock. I'm not trying to upset you. I love my printed books. They are in every room here. I love taking them down off the shelf. I love reminiscing about their histories with me. And if suddenly they were all gone, so there wasn't a question of me getting rid of them, if I just woke up tomorrow and they were all gone, all the shelves were empty, maybe even all the bookcases were gone. If they were all gone instantly, and I wasn't the one who had to decide to get rid of them, who had to see them go, if they all just disappeared, I wouldn't replace any of them. I wouldn't replace any of them. I would put okay, this is a refurbished iPad. I just noticed on the back of this it says property of Richardson Inc. I swear that's not Mark Richardson. I swear that's not. I know that I owe a lot to him and his long-suffering family. They've given me a lot, but they don't just literally give me all my clothes and all of my tech. I can't get away from that name. One of the greatest biographies coming out this fall is by a Richardson. Anyway, I just noticed that. I didn't realize. I forgot that this was a refurbished iPad that I just got for $200. But what? Oh right, David Wiley's question. My scandalous answer is: if it was a clear break, I wouldn't replace any of them. I would just build an enormous e-library on a device, on one slate of glass and plastic with no books anywhere. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. If the transition were painless. I'm not going to do that transition on my own. Sorry if I shocked any of you. I would have multiple tablets. I would max out the storage capacity of every one of them. I'm already doing that. On a handful of tablets, I'm already doing that, making me strongly consider another device, another touchscreen device, solely so that I can keep putting stuff on it. And the reason why I'm so concerned about that, about maxing out storage capacity, is because I seem to be the only person in the world who can't get Caliber to work. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to worry. But one way or another, if they were all gone instantly, I wouldn't replace anything. Don't be ridiculous. I wouldn't do it. They'd all be gone, and I'd be able to tell stories on BookTube about, oh my, I missed them so much. It wouldn't slow me down for reading at all. Not in the slightest. but I wouldn't have... Just yesterday, I spent 45 minutes looking for a book. 45 minutes. At 28, I don't have many 45-minute intervals left. I spent 45 minutes looking for a book. It takes 10 seconds to find a book on this device. And this device already has more books on it than I have on the shelves in this house. So, anyway, that's my answer. There's no top priority. I wouldn't get any more. Let's see here. We'll just move on. No, actually, let's stop and we'll come back. We'll end this one with a shocker, and we'll come back for part 3.